If you love drawing mushrooms but you don't know how to add this level of detail to your drawings, this video is for you. Today I'm going to walk you through 4 different ways to create mushroom illustrations, so grab your pens, pencil, and eraser, and let's get started. Before we jump in, I want to let you know that I'm designing a new ink drawing program. It's basically going to be either a bootcamp or a challenge or something really fun. It's designed for people like you that want to really take it to the next level with their drawings. So if that sounds like fun to you, please join the waitlist in the link in the description, and I will let you know when the program launches. Now let's get started. In this video, I'm going to experiment with focusing more on the rendering of the drawing. So I'm not going to talk too much on the sketching, proportions, any of that. So we're basically going to start with a basic mushroom. The traditional mushroom, when you think of a mushroom, you probably think of this. Right here, I'm using a mechanical pencil by Pentel. It's a 9B pencil. Once you have your general sketch, you can outline. And this is actually super important because I see a lot of your drawings that you guys tag me on Instagram, or you guys like send it to me on DM and that kind of stuff. And sometimes if you outline your drawing with too thick of a line, your drawing will look like a drawing. Like, of course, we know it's a drawing, but you want to create that 3D effect. So if your contour, like your outline, is too strong and too thick, you will have a really hard time reaching a realistic effect. So what I suggest you do is use a really thin type of pen. I am using a 003 here, and you're going to very lightly outline just the main parts of your mushroom. Another thing I'm doing with this one is I want it to look like it's poking out from the ground, so I'm adding a little bit of plants in the bottom. These are going to be really tiny leaves. I'm going to make them really dark so that they kind of like blend in with the mushrooms in the base. And of course, it's completely optional, but it's a nice way to kind of like fill the space. And now we can jump into rendering. So you're basically, once you're done your outline, you're going to erase your pencil marks. Then you can start hatching wherever you see there's a shadow. So just picture the light coming from above. Obviously, like this is going to be really close to the ground. So the light will generally be coming from above. So imagine everything that is being hit by the light and everything that is hidden from the light. So of course, the part that's underneath the cap is going to be kind of like the darkest spot. We of course get some light reflecting from the ground going up. So we're going to have a little bit of light on the outsides of the gills, which is like this bottom part underneath the cap. But this part in the center where the stem is coming out, that is going to be a really dark spot. So I recommend you start there. And if you look at any mushroom that is kind of like similar to this shape, you're going to see that you're going to have very clear lines that are going from the center out. And it's really pretty and kind of tricky to represent with ink because you basically want to make that effect and create those lines by hatching where the shadows are so that the lines can be the light, right? So you're not drawing the lines themselves, you're drawing the shadows around the lines. Does that make sense? I hope this is making sense. So you basically want to leave white where the lines would be. So if this is helpful, you can mark with a pencil where all these lines are going, and then you're going to use your ink around it. So in between the pencil lines where you have this white line going out to the edge of the cap, you're going to hatch with your ink in between those lines. I really hope this is making sense. The darker you make these lines, the deeper it's going to look. And then you're going to have more of a 3D effect, which I'm assuming that's what you want to create. Right now, we're not doing like the final shadows just yet. We can definitely make these darker, but we want to kind of start placing the clusters of shadows and just kind of like positioning our light, and then we can intensify that as we go. So what I'm doing now is hatching in the stem, and this is going to be basically like short dashes that go down basically. So this is basically some vertical hatching that you're doing up and down, and you're gonna make the top a little bit darker and then leave the stem a bit lighter as it goes down. So basically this is what I'm drawing. You have to keep in mind that you're drawing the shadows. That's all you're drawing when you're trying to do a realistic effect of anything. All you're gonna draw is the shadows. You don't really need to think too much about the elements because they usually are pretty simple, and what creates your drawing really is the textures. I kind of freestyled a little bit with this plants at the bottom, like the little leaves and everything. And yeah, I didn't want to like think too much about that. So I just made them pretty dark. I kind of like just covered it and then hatched in between. So just to create a little bit of volume of plants, even though if you really look through it, just a few branches with leaves, and everything else is kind of like just some strong hatching that sort of looks like grass. If you have a quick glance on the drawing, you won't be able to see what that is. So you can kind of do that when you're trying to create volume of plants. You create some main plants that are clearly plants, and then everything else you can kind of like hatch and do some like scribbles and stuff like that. And now we can add some texture to the cap. So basically what I'm gonna do here is going to be a little bit of a mix between stippling and hatching. And honestly, like if you were asking yourself, but how do I choose what technique to use to create any texture? You're basically gonna look at a reference and try to understand what kind of technique would help you create that texture. So if something looks like I'm sure you practice stippling and you've also practiced hatching, and you can see they're pretty different, right? So if you're drawing something that has a texture that has veins, like leaves and that kind of stuff, or like a tree trunk, clearly you see so many lines that hatching just makes so much sense, right? Stippling can kind of work with all sorts of different things, depending on the size of your pen and that kind of stuff. So it's a great way to kind of create shadows without committing so much to a specific type of texture. So I am kind of choosing, because this is a mushroom, it's not super smooth, and I want to create this kind of like uneven texture on the thing. I am going to do stippling because it's really easy to control how I'm placing my shadows. I want the curve to look smooth, but I don't want the material, like the texture itself on the thing, to look super smooth. So I think stippling is perfect for this. Basically, we are making it darker by adding more dots to the bottom part of the cap. So basically where it curves down to the base where the gills are, I'm gonna make that spot a little bit darker. And one really key detail here that I briefly mentioned earlier is that there's always a light that is going to be reflecting from the ground up. So if a light is coming from above and there's lighter, way smoother light that is reflecting from the ground up, where would this light hit, right? So you're gonna have the edges and the sides, sort of like the bottom sides of this whole circle that is the base of this cap, a bit lighter. And the way we're going to do this is by leaving a little bit of light on the outsides of the gills. And at the center here, where we have the stem, and you wouldn't be able to see the gills over there, you're going to leave just a tiny little line of white paper there. So you don't want your cap in the middle to blend with the stem, right? You want to leave like a little white sliver of light there. Once you have your shadow scheme, so basically you have the main shadows placed, you know which parts are the darker ones and which ones are the lighter ones, you're basically going to intensify everything. So this is a time that you can kind of like look up from your drawing and be like, okay, where does it seem too flat? Where is a spot that could be darker, right? So if you have drop shadows, if you have a hard light hitting an element of your drawing, there is going to be a drop shadow right under it. And as usual, if you look at your drawing, which I kind of feel like I ended up leaving it a bit too dark, and if you feel the same way, the only thing you can do to help your case is to add some white highlights. And you can do that by using a white gel pen or something like this opaque white ink by Copic. I always show this on my videos because I love it. It comes with this thin little brush and it honestly is so amazing. And of course, you can also use it to kind of like erase little mistakes if you see like there's a little line that's smudged over there or something like that. And this was our first mushroom. This was very dramatic. So now we're going to experiment with a very light mushroom, and we're going to try to create texture without adding this much ink and without adding this much shadows. So here is catching the second mushrooms. And these ones are kind of like shiitake mushrooms. I don't know if this is exactly what they are. I'm not like an expert in species of mushrooms, but they look like the types of mushrooms that you eat. So they don't have that rounded cap that's like the traditional mushroom that you have in mind. It's kind of like the first one we did. They're going to be kind of like super wavy. It's almost like, imagine a Mexican hat that is super wavy and without the head part, of course. So it's basically kind of like flat at the top, and then the sides are super wavy like that. So you're gonna create these folds like this, and you're gonna be able to see underneath it and also on top of it. And you can really play with the shape of this. I feel like the more wavy and the more like crazy you are with your lines, like the cooler your mushroom is, but this is just my opinion. You can kind of experiment with this. And also to create the folds underneath like that, you can add a simple line when the fold is like super sharp, but we can also do that with the shading and the textures later. So just keep the waves where they are, and it's going to make more sense once we start shading. From here, you want to outline your mushroom, and again, we're using a 003. It's super light, it's not a new pen, so it's not releasing a ton of ink, and you're basically just doing the contour and the folds. And now for the shading on this one, it's similar to the first one in the sense that we're going to be hatching short lines and vertically, kind of like along the movement of the mushroom. We don't have the gills this time around, so basically both the bottom, the top, and the stem kind of like have the same type of texture. You want the texture, it's kind of like sponges, right? Like it's kind of like a sponge, or this is the kind of like the closest thing I can think of that would kind of like resemble that type of texture. So just find the spots that are hidden from the light. So basically some parts of the folds underneath the cap. I don't even know if like in a mushroom like this, it would be called a cap, but you know what I mean? Like if the first one we were referring to the half oval shape as the cap, then this like wavy part, the Mexican hat will be the cap. Okay, we can call it Mexican hat actually. Let's call it Mexican hat. So in the wavy Mexican hat, underneath the Mexican hat, you're gonna be hatching where you know that there's not gonna be no light. So you're gonna find the spots that are dark, and you're gonna hatch, and you're gonna try to create the curve from the stem to the edges of the Mexican hat. It's actually quite funny that we're calling it Mexican hat. I like it. And as you see what I'm doing here, the hatching is going to follow the direction that goes from stem to edge of Mexican hat. So as you can see, what I'm doing here is the direction of the hatching is super important because it's going to help you create the wave effect. And here, as you can see, what I'm doing here is in the stem, I am hatching vertically. And then once it curves up and out at the bottom of the Mexican hat, the direction goes from basically from stem to edge of Mexican hat. So you have to kind of like picture you're creating these waves. So if you have this wave, in what direction these veins are going, in what direction should the lines go if I know that point A is stem and point B is edge? I hope this is making sense, guys. And for the top of the Mexican hat, you're gonna try to leave it lighter, but where there's kind of like a part that goes down a little bit, the middle part. So the middle part that's lower than the higher parts, you can make that a little bit darker, but it's super smooth. You really want to use an old pen for this. Another trick to make your lines be really light is kind of like tilt your pen to the side. You can also use a piece of paper and kind of like practice on the side as well, so that you can make sure that all your lines are coming out pretty smoothly. And this is basically the whole process of this mushroom. Honestly, it's pretty straightforward. Once you understand and you define the directions of the lines, then all you have to do is intensify the really dark spots. So one way to make your mushroom really pop is to get the spots that are really close to the stem at the bottom of the Mexican hat and make those super dark. Every time you have a fold that's going like super close to the stem as well, then you're clearly like creating a shadow on the stem. So that's also a good indicator that you have to create a shadow there. When it comes to the stem, as you can see on this one, you're basically making the middle parts more like to the right, a little bit darker, but the edges on the sides are lighter. So this is one way to create this rounded effect for the stem. So yeah, it really is a game of layering. You're basically layering more and more lines, and you're going to make it darker by adding more lines wherever you think there's a shadow. One thing I want to point out too is that if I was doing this mushroom first before the first one, it would probably be darker. It would probably end up being a lot darker. And I think that's because it takes a level of confidence and familiarity with your pen and just kind of like warming up your pen control and all of that to be able to create a light 3D effect. Creating a light texture is way harder than creating a dark texture. So unless you have an element that is really dark and you want to create this kind of like dramatic effect, you can do this intentionally and make it really dark. Okay, that's totally fine. But I feel like it's also kind of like a way to challenge yourself to get better at drawing in creating realistic effects on light elements. So if you're challenging yourself, drawing a white flower, in my opinion, is quite a bit harder than drawing like a pink flower. Like a pink flower is gonna have a lot more nuance in terms of darks and shadows and colors, but something that is white is going to have a lot less. So you have a lot less nuance to work with, and it's just harder to convey the same effect. So honestly, don't beat yourself up if your mushroom is ending up a bit darker. This one is pretty complex. So I just wanted to show you guys how you could potentially do something like this. And because this was quite complex, let's go back to some more basic types of mushrooms. But the new challenge with this one is that I'm using a reference picture that has little droplets of water. So it's basically like, imagine it rained and then there's like little bubbles of water all around these mushrooms. So the shape, of course, is different. We have the cap of the mushroom being like skinnier and it kind of like folds at the bottom. I actually have seen a lot of these reference pictures on this kind of mushroom that they look a little bit transparent. So that's also quite an interesting challenge. It's not what I'm doing here, but if you want to challenge yourself, you can also try to convey the transparency on your rendering, which is a whole different ball game. But if you're feeling brave and courageous, I recommend you try it out. And maybe let me know in the comments how it goes. But yeah, this one's, we're going to keep it simple. It's going to be very similar to the first mushroom we did, but I'm going to try to nail the colors a little bit better. And then we're going to play with the concept of having water droplets. So as you can see here, I sketched, outlined, and erased my pencil. And notice that the droplets of water were sketched before I did the contour of things, because the droplets, you kind of want them to be poking out on the sides, some of them, so that it looks a little bit more 3D. You don't need to do that with all of them, but quite a few of them, as you can see, they kind of like poke out so that you can have that 3D effect. And then we can get hatching, guys. Basically, same process as before. Again, the texture of mushrooms, very rarely they are flat, smooth, and shiny. Actually, I don't know if that's true. I don't know if that's relative. This is just the references I'm working with, guys. They don't look very smooth. So we are going to be playing with that concept today. So you're basically going to hatch again from kind of like in a vertical format. You're going up and down and trying to get from the top of the mushroom to the edges of these, should I call it witch hat? Or it's more of a wizard hat. Yeah, let's call it a wizard hat. So from the top of the wizard hat to the edges of the wizard hat, you're gonna hatch darker on the left side. In this case here, we have shadows coming from above, but slightly from the right. So we're gonna try to make the left side of everything a little bit darker. And as usual, we have the reflection shadow from the ground. So if the light is coming from above, hitting the ground and reflecting back up, then we're gonna have a little bit of a light ring around the base of the witch hat. Let's leave the droplets of water to the end, so just leave them empty. Just make sure you don't hatch on them. Just hatch all around the bubbles, leave them white, and we'll work with them in the end. There's also two little mushrooms in the back, and we're gonna do them a little bit darker just to create that effect of depth. So the ones that are forward are going to be looking a little bit lighter, and the ones that are darker will generally look like they are farther back. So this is the type of effect we're creating with the lights and shadows. As you go, you're gonna start noticing where you want to intensify the shadows. So kind of as with the other mushrooms, at the top of the stem, right under the base of the hat, and in this case here to the left, you're gonna have a really, really dark shadow. So you want to use your darkest pen, the one that's releasing a little bit more ink. Maybe it's a newer pen, or maybe you go up to a 01, 02 or something like that, and really just strongly contour the left side of your stem, and that alone is going to make your drawing pop quite a bit. We're also leaving the edges, so the bottom parts on the top of the hat, a little bit lighter because they look like they're kind of like fading out. So you want it to look like the light is really hitting there, and that will help create this like curved effect. And now we can jump into doing the bubbles. To create a water effect and so it looks 3D and it looks like a bubble, you want the top and the bottom of the circle to be a little bit darker. Especially underneath the bottom, you're gonna hatch a little bit so it looks like a shadow because it's 3D, it's poking out, and surprisingly, even though water is transparent, it does create a shadow. And then you're gonna hatch slightly inside of it and at the top. So you're kind of leaving the spaces in between the middle, the top, and the bottom white, if that makes sense. You have to keep in mind that water kind of like amplifies things. So if you have a hatching and you can picture what the hatching of that texture underneath that bubble would look like, you're gonna try to create that, but slightly opening up to the side so it looks like it's a little bit bigger and amplified. And as you can see here, you're basically creating that shadow underneath the bubble, you're creating a dark mark at the top of the bubble, and then you're kind of hatching in the middle. And that's basically all you're doing. You're gonna do that in different scales, right? Because you have some bubbles that are bigger, so you're gonna be able to be a little bit more detailed, and then some bubbles that are smaller, be a little bit less detailed. But you're kind of like following this concept with all of them. So as you can see here, I am drawing this black line that doesn't go necessarily around the top of the circle, but a little bit below. I'm leaving a little bit of white there, and then I'm hatching underneath to create the shadow. And then I'm also hatching inside lightly while leaving a little bit of white so that we can basically kind of like, the effect we're trying to create is that we're seeing the hatching that's underneath the bubble, but you're also kind of like reflecting a little bit of light because that's what water does. Kind of hard to describe, but I hope that you can see what I'm doing here and you try to create this effect. It's also helpful if you look at a picture that has a bunch of droplets of water, you're going to see how they react and like behave around the colors and the textures because they are going to distort what's underneath it. If you have a bubble that's like big enough, like a photograph that really portrays what the inside of a bubble, you'll be able to see how you can actually see underneath it, but the surrounding areas are going to be darker. And yeah, that's basically it. So you can kind of like do this with all the little bubbles you created here in this drawing. I kind of feel like the bubble effect is actually pretty cool. It's a really interesting way to add some interest to your drawing. It's a really cool way to add something like really interesting to your botanical drawings. So yeah, I hope you tried this out and you let me know. Also, I guess because we've been talking about hats. And yeah, now that we finished the witch/wizard hat mushroom, let me know in the comments, guys, if you're hashtag team Mexican hat or hashtag team wizard hat. Or just, just say hi in the comments or something because it helps my video, guys. It really does. And by the way, if you're still watching, I love you so much. Now let's move on to the last mushroom, and I'm going to be fully transparent with you guys. In this last mushroom, I was a little bit tired, so I chose a mushroom that I was like, okay, this one is going to be easy. It's pretty flat and it's really interesting. Everyone's going to love it. And it turned out to be super time consuming. So, ink pens have this way of surprising me still with how long it takes to complete a drawing, guys. It's still mesmerizing. So basically what we're doing with this one, this is the kind of, I don't even know if we call them mushrooms like officially. It's like fungi that is born like on trees. It kind of like grows as like this like wavy flat shapes on top of each other. It kind of to me reminds me of like corals underwater and that kind of stuff. So this is basically what we're going to be doing. And what you have to do here is imagine that you are drawing circles and in the middle, but then instead of circles, it's super wavy. I hope this makes sense. It's basically a wavy shape where the last part of the line ends in the center of the shape. And then you're going to do a bunch of those kind of like overlapping each other. And then you're going to contour, creating kind of like a double line on the edge of all of it. And then once you're done, you're going to outline the outside line and not the inside line. So basically the inside line for the double line is just marking where the hatchings in the middle are going to end. So you can also do this on your drawings. You can have pencil sketch that marks the actual place where the ink is going to be, but you can also mark like general shapes that will guide you without having to outline them. And then once you have your outline, you can draw these lines that are coming from the center. So basically the tip of the final line of your circle/wavy shape. And imagine that a bunch of lines are coming from the center out and they end where the second pencil line here in the middle ends, just like I'm doing here. And I feel like this alone just creates such a cool effect. I love line art because like you just put a bunch of lines together in a sort of like a parallel effect. And look, it already kind of looks a little bit 3D. The more like the lines are kind of like ending together in the center. How amazing that that looks like it's going deeper into the thing. It's so cool, isn't it? Anyway, this was me nerding out on my love for ink pens. And yeah, you're just gonna do this all over and just keep doing it until all of it is complete. And once you have all the lines marked, of course, you left the outside edges white, right? Because you didn't go all the way to the end of the edge of the wavy shape. You went to the second line. Now you can erase that second line. And this is kind of the result you're going to have. You're going to have the outside edges being super light, which also creates a little bit of a 3D effect and makes these gills, can I call them gills? Which is kind of like what it looks like. This is what we're calling. We're calling the lines gills. It makes them look a little bit more 3D and as if the parts that are in the center are a little bit deeper, which that's exactly what we want. And now, basically, I thought that we could just hatch and keep hatching and that would be easy. We just have to follow the lines and just keep going. But it really, guys, it gets a little bit old. I'm not gonna lie. I got a little bit tired of this one. But it does look cool. So you can just really keep going. Remember that you are drawing the shadows. You are not drawing the gills. The gills are the white paper that you're leaving behind. They are going to be representing your mushroom. So your mushroom is the white paper and you are drawing the lines around your mushroom, basically. So remember this, like you're not drawing the mushroom itself. You're not drawing your element. You're drawing the shadows that shape your element. I hope this makes sense. Once I actually figured that out, my drawings improved massively. Because it's kind of intuitive, like you're drawing something, you're gonna want to draw the thing. But when you're working with a white paper and a dark material, which is the ink, yeah, you're not actually drawing your thing. You're drawing the shadows and you're drawing the spots where the light doesn't hit. One could even say you're drawing the darkness. And yeah, you're welcome for this reflection. And feel free to take that to therapy, guys. This can be pretty deep practice. Yeah, as you can see, I am just kind of like throwing some words out at you and not saying much because this was so long. There's like not much else for me to say. You're basically going to be patching hours of your day away. Yeah, make sure you have a good show in the background. I was watching more girls as I was doing this and it was great. I really caught up with it. I'm actually going to count here. I'm looking at my recordings and I'm going to let you know how much time this actually took. And yeah, according to my recordings here, this took me about an hour and a half to complete, which is nowhere near that bad. But yeah, as you keep going, you're gonna feel the need to make the centers a little bit darker. I recommend you do that. And then you can kind of like go over all of them. You can also use the overlaps to kind of play with the shadows a little bit as well and create more of that 3D effect. So every little piece of mushroom that's underneath another piece of mushroom, you're going to create a drop shadow underneath it. So basically contouring on the outside of the top layer of mushroom will create that 3D effect. You can also hatch underneath and create kind of like a trunk effect. You can use a dark, thick pen for this because now we're working with a different kind of scale, right? Like if you're working with small mushrooms on top of a trunk, the trunk will have bigger marks on them. So yeah, you can use kind of like a 01 or 02 pen to do the hatching. And this is it, everyone. This is how I render my drawings. All of these tips kind of apply to any other subject you like to draw with ink pens. I'm a big fan of ink because I feel like you can create really dramatic effects that pencil can never achieve. Don't get me wrong, I do like pencil drawings, but ink pens are just so expressive. It's just amazing. So I really hope you like this and this was helpful to you. If you do like this video, I really think you're gonna like my leaf drawing video with ink pens. I teach some different techniques on that video that I wasn't able to show on this one because there was no need. seed, like cross hatching and how to apply that on leaf. Also, leaf texture is quite different than mushroom texture because with the mushrooms you have kind of more of like the spongy effect, and the leaves are more like paper, sort of like the texture is kind of like a hard folded paper. So yeah, check out the video after this one, and thank you so much for watching. You guys are the best. Let me know in the comments what you would like to see next, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye everyone.